everyone, how are you today? My name is Nisa and you're also my friends Tifa and Dandi. We are going to discuss and answer a listening question for TOEFL test, especially for part C in listening TOEFL test. It is about long talks. Before going to answer the question and explaining the strategies to answer it, we need to know what long talk is. Long talks are the parts of listening section of TOEFL which consists of several talks. You will hear the talks and questions in the recording. In every talk, usually there is one speaker talking about something. For example, the professor of economy class or the speaker in history class. One talk consists of several questions. Usually, the questions are ordered based on the ordering of this explanation from the speaker. The talks are often about the aspect of school life, the lecture style in American universities, and topics currently in the news. When we do exercise about long talks, we need to remember some strategies to answer questions for long talks. First, you need to preview the answer to the question to anticipate the topics and questions. The second, you need to listen carefully to the first line because it contains the topic or main idea. The third one, draw the conclusion about who, what, when, where, which, and how the talk is about. The fourth, when listen to the talk, try to determine the correct answer. And the fifth, when we are not sure about the answer, we should guessing the answer and do not leave any answers blank. And the last one, you need to use remaining time so you have enough time to look at the answers and listen to the question. Now we are going to try answering question from several talks. Let's move on and listen to the first talk.
Now listen to part of a talk in an economics class.
Now, class, I'd like to start off by discussing the reading. So, who can tell me about Adam Smith?
He wrote The Wealth of Nations, right?
Bingo. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. And why is that such an important book? Natalie?
Well, Adam Smith has been called the father of economics. And The Wealth of Nations was the first book to introduce the idea of the division of labor, which is, pretty much the model of most industries.
Well said, Natalie. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was the first comprehensive take on modern economic theory. And by modern, I mean the late 18th century. The book was published in 1776. Smith introduced the concept of the division of labor, which means that the way a good or service is produced is divided into a number of tasks that are performed by different workers, instead of all the tasks being done by the same person. To illustrate the division of labor, Smith counted how many tasks went into making a pin, drawing out a piece of wire, cutting it to the right length, straightening it, putting a head on one end and a point on the other, and packaging pins for sale, to name just a few. Smith counted 18 distinct tasks that were often done by different people, all for a single pin, believe it or not. Now, modern manufacturing companies still follow the same principle. They divide each individual task in the production of a given object. Even a relatively simple business like a restaurant divides up the tasks of serving meals into a range of jobs.
I'm sorry, Professor. I don't understand what makes the division of labor so special. Why is it important that Adam Smith pointed this out in his book?
Well, nowadays, we are used to working in companies where we each are given a specific role to fill. But this idea was revolutionary in the 18th century. Adam Smith was the first to really understand and explain why the division of labor was and is so important. When the tasks involved with producing a good or service are divided, workers and businesses can produce a greater quantity. In his observations of pin factories, for example, Smith observed that one worker alone might make 20 pins in a day, but that a small business of 10 workers who each needed to do just 2 or 3 of the 18 separate tasks could make 48,000 pins in a day. How can a group of workers, each specializing in certain tasks, produce so much more than the same number of workers who try to produce the entire good or service by themselves?
I think I remember from the reading that Smith mentioned specialization is important.
That's right, Natalie. Well, that's one of the 3 reasons stated by Smith, actually, but it's a good place to start. Specialization in a particular small job allows workers to focus on the parts of the production process where they have an advantage. People have different skills, talents, and interests, so they will be better at some jobs than at others. Whatever the reason, if people specialize in the production of what they do best, they will be more productive than if they produce a lot of combinations of things, some of which they are good at and some of which they're not. Smith's second point is that workers who specialize in certain tasks often learn to produce more quickly and with higher quality. This pattern holds true for many workers, including assembly line laborers who build cars, stylists who cut hair, and doctors who perform heart surgery. In fact, specialized workers often know their jobs well enough to suggest innovative ways to do their work faster and better. Specialization also allows businesses to take advantage of economies of scale. Maybe I should write that on the board. Right, so economies of scale means that for many goods, as the level of production increases, the average cost of producing each individual unit declines. For example, if a factory produces only 100 cars per year, each car will be quite expensive to make on average. However, if a factory produces 50,000 cars each year, then it can set up an assembly line with huge machines and workers performing specialized tasks, and the average cost of the production per car will be lower.
Now, answer the questions. 1. What is the lecture mainly about? 2. How does the professor organize his lecture? 3. What is the professor implying when he says this?
That's right, Natalie. Well, that's one of the 3 reasons stated by Smith, actually, but it's a good place to start.
Four. According to the lecture, what example does Smith provide in order to describe the division of labor in his book? Five. What does the professor imply about Smith's concept of the division of labor? Six. According to the lecture, what is specialization?
For listening to the audio, let's discuss and answer it together. The first question is, what is the lecture mainly about? There are four choices. First, A. How to make more products in less time. B. Why the idea of division of labor is important in economy. C. Adam Smith and his book The Wealth of Nations. And D. How to split up one job into several different ones. And the correct answer for this question is B. Why the idea of division of labor is important in economy. B is correct because in the talk there is one student asking about why the division of labor is important and the professor explained the answer. And C is incorrect because the talk itself is not about the book but the concept from the book of Adam Smith. And while A and D is not the main topic, it is only part from professor explanation to support the main explanation, so that's why it is incorrect. So the correct answer is B. Now let's move to the question number 2. The question is, how does the professor organize his lecture? There are four choices. A. He compares and contrasts the main idea with something the students read. B. He introduces the topic and then discusses a few examples. And C. He asks the students questions that elaborates on their answers with example. And D. He explains the function of a particular. And can you guess the correct answer for this question? It is C. He asks the students questions that elaborates on their answers with examples. The answer C is incorrect because in the beginning of the lecture, you will hear the professor say, "Now class, I'd like to start off by discussing the reading. So, who can tell me about Adam Smith?" He started the lecture by asking his student about who is Adam Smith. After his students answering his question, he responds to them by adding and elaborating the answer and giving examples. While answer IA is incorrect because the professor did not compare and contrast the main idea from the students. They are also reading and discussing the same book, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And B is incorrect because the professor did not start the lecture by introducing the topic, but asking his student about who is Adam Smith. Then he discussed about the concept in his book. Then D is incorrect because the professor did not only talk about the function of a particular, but more than that. He talks about the concept of the wealth of nations and the importance of this concept, and also the example from these concepts. Next, question number 3. And the question is, what is the professor implying when he says this? That's right, Natalie. Well, that's one of the 3 reasons stated by Smith. Actually, that is a good place to start. There are 4 choices for this question. First, A, the students didn't exactly answer the whole question, but what she said will help to continue the conversation. B, at first the professor thought the student answered the question, but then realized she didn't. And C, he is trying to politely tell the student she didn't answer the question correctly. D, he is pleased that the student at least tried to answer the question. And the correct answer is A. The student didn't exactly answer the whole question, but what she said will help to continue the conversation. The explanation of the correct answer is because Natalie's answer is not too correct because the professor question is, how can a group of workers, each specializing in certain tasks, produce so much more than the same number of workers who try to produce the entire good or service by themselves? Then Natalie answered, I think I remember from the reading that Smith mentioned that specialization was important. Natalie's answer is not exactly correct for Professor's question, but it helped to continue the talk and start the explanation about specialization because the professor said, but, there's the word but it's a good place to start, To answer a question like this, we can do it by understanding what the speaker says. We don't really need to listen to the whole talk, but most important thing is that we can interpret the words from the speaker, because what he said contained the meaning to have us answering the question. Because the professor said it is a good place to start. So it is the correct answer. Next, we move to the question number 4. The question is, according to the lecturer, what example does Smith provide in order to describe the division of labor in his book? There are 4 choices for these questions. A. He investigated a car company and realized that it's cheaper to produce more at a time. And B. He counted how many individual tasks are required to make a pin. And choice C. He described how if everyone had a simpler job, companies would make more money. And D. He created a pin company and divided up the work among many employees. Could you guess the correct answer for this question? And the correct answer is B. He counted how many individual tasks are required to make a pin. The reason why B is correct because in the beginning of the talk, Professor said, to illustrate the division of labor, Smith counted how many tasks went into making a pin. Then he also said, in his observations of pin factories, Smith observed that one worker alone might make 20 pins in a day, but that a small business of 10 workers who each need to do just 2 or 3 of the 18 separate tasks could make 48,000 pins in a day. It means that Smith provided the example about how many individual tasks are required to make a pin, and the other answer like A is incorrect because the car company is stuck when they are talking about specialization. And C is incorrect because Smith did not provide this kind of example. And last, D is incorrect because there is no explanation that said Smith himself created a pin company. He's just doing observation about that company. Okay, we move to the question number 5. The question is, what does the professor imply about Smith's concept of the division of labor? In the board, you will have 4 choices. A. He was simply the first person to write a book on something we already knew about. And B. His idea was technically simple, but it had a great impact on business and the economy. And the choice C. He deserved more recognition for his work. And the last choice D. He had a good idea, but separating jobs into more jobs just costs money. Could you guess the correct answer? It's B. His idea was technically simple, but it had a great impact on business and the economy. The reason why B is correct because when the student asked, "I'm sorry, professor, but I don't understand what makes the division of labor so special. Why is it important that Adam Smith pointed this out in his book?" And the professor answered the student's question by saying, "Well, nowadays, we are used to working in companies where we each are given a specific role to fill. But this idea was revolutionary in the 18th century. Adam Smith was the first to really understand and explain why the division of labor was and is so important. From what Professor said, we can understand that Smith's concept having a great impact on business and the economy. And the other choices like answer A, C, and D are incorrect because there are no exact explanation that talk about it in the talk. To answer a question like this, we really need to listen carefully and remember the important point that given in the talk. And also remember what information does not include in the talk. Okay, we move to the last questions. It is number 6. In the audio, you will hear, according to the lecture, what is specialization? There are 4 answers choices for this question. A, being able to choose what job you want to focus on. And the answer B, when a worker produce higher quality products. And C, your job focuses on one specific task so you can be really good at it. And D, when a company only hires specialists. You need to guess what the correct answer, and the correct answer is C. Your job focuses on one specific task so you can be really good at it. The reason why it is correct because in the part when the professor talking about specialization, he said, specialization in a particular small job allows workers to focus on the parts of the production process where they have an advantage. People have different skills, talents, and interests, so they will be better at some jobs than at others. From his statement, we can conclude that specialization means that focusing on one specific task so you can be really good at it. To answer this kind of question, we actually can use our understanding about a word like specialization. Because specialization is often occur when we talk about a job. So it's not uncommon word we hear because we often hear about it. And the answer A maybe can trick you, but the important point that we need to remember is that specialization relate with something or specific task that make us are good on it because we really focus to it. While answer B and D are incorrect because they do not relate with the meaning of specialization. It is the last questions for talk 1. Now we move to the second talk that will be discussed with my friend.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Lahtiva Rahmadaniah Putri, and in this video I will try to discuss and answer the question in passage 2. And the first step that we should do is listen to the audio. And here is the audio.
Now listen to part of a talk in a biology class.
All right, now a common misconception about global climate change, commonly referred to as global warming, is that if we experience an unusually hot day in this area alone, then it's evidence of climate change. I just want to take a second to make it clear that changes in local weather is a weather-related event, not a climate-related one. Climate refers to the long-term, predictable atmospheric conditions of a specific area, not the conditions of a day or even a week for that matter. Weather refers to the conditions of the atmosphere during a short period of time. Weather forecasts are usually made in 48-hour cycles and are more concerned with daily and hourly predictions. Yes, Henry?
So you're saying that climate has more to do with seasonal changes? For example, like the difference between summer and winter in New York, while weather is more about the conditions outside today or tomorrow.
That's right, Henry. So now that we have established exactly what we mean by climate, let me ask you about the causes of climate change. I mentioned them in the last class.
Well, we started by talking about the Industrial Revolution, which began in the early 1800s, and that's when most of society started burning fossil fuels like oil and coal. And those fuels release a bunch of carbon dioxide into the air, and when there's more carbon dioxide in the air, more of the sun's energy gets trapped in the atmosphere, so the climate of the Earth warms.
Perfect, Jessica. Maybe I should have you teach the class. So yes, most of us know about the harmful effects of the burning of fossil fuels and the release of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But what causes climate change? There are two more. Henry?
I know one is solar intensity, and the other, I think, has something to do with volcanoes? Sorry, I can't remember exactly.
Well, like you said, the intensity of the sun does change, believe it or not. Changes in the amount of heat from the sun has been proposed as one explanation for past climate events. And the third you're thinking of is volcanic eruptions.
That's right. I remember now. The gases released during an eruption can change the climate over a period of a few years. But this type of climate change is usually just short term, right?
Right. Now, let's get back to fossil fuels. As Jessica mentioned, increased amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are usually released through the burning of fossil fuels. Make no mistake, what may sometimes be reported in the media as debatable, there is no debate among scientists as to whether or not climate change is due to human activity. True, the strength of the sun's rays and the eruption of volcanoes can play a role, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, is to blame for the rise in global temperatures. And we are now starting to see the tremendous impact global warming is having on our environment. Between 2002 and 2006, Greenland lost almost 200 kilometers worth of glaciers. And as the glaciers melt around the globe, the sea levels rise, which threatens the coastal life of humans and the marine life of aquatic species. Now, many organisms on land are also being affected by the changes in climate. Temperature and rainfall play key roles in determining the geographic distribution of plants and animals. For example, researchers have shown that 385 plant species in England are flowering 5 days sooner than usual. In addition, insect species that pollinate and rely on these flowers are now arriving sooner than in previous decades. This mismatched timing of plants and insects could result in the loss of both species in the area. Small changes in the atmosphere have already made a big impact on species that rely on specific weather conditions. Most think of polar bears and their disappearing homeland of snow and ice. But this is just one of the many organisms threatened by global climate change, and that includes us humans.
After hearing the audio, we will try to answer and try to find the reason why we choose that option as an answer. And let's take a look to the first question. The first question is, what is the professor mainly discussing? And the options are A. The pros and cons of climate change, B. The causes and effects of climate change, and C. How to prevent climate change, and D. What happens when we burn fossil fuels. For this question, the correct answer is B. The reason why is because in that talk, in the beginning of the talk, the speaker said about a common misconception about global climate change. They explained how the causes and effects caused by climate change. It was proved in the middle of the talk when the speaker said, "Let me ask you about the causes of climate change. I mentioned them in the last class." Then after that, the talk explained the effects arising from climate change. So that's the reason why the answer to this question is B. A is wrong because in the talk, there is no thing that discusses the pros of the climate change. C is wrong because in the talk, there was no discussion on how to prevent climate change. And the last is D, is wrong because it is not related to the conversation on the top. Next question is, the professor discusses several causes and effects of climate change. Indicate which information matches a cause or effect. This question is worth 2 points. And for this question, after hearing the audio, I can say that volcanic eruptions and burning fossil fuels are cause, and for the effects are temperature changes and changes in rainfall. I said that because it mentioned clearly in the audio. Next, the third question. The question is, what is the difference between weather and climate? And for this question, we choose two answers. The options are, weather refers to condition in the atmosphere of a long period of time. B, climate refers to forecast over a 48-hour period. C, weather is more concerned with daily or hourly prediction. D, climate refers to predictable long-term atmospheric condition. And for this question, the answer are C and D. The answer is C. The answer are C and D because in that talk they say about the difference between weather and climate. In that talk, they said climate refers to the long-term predictable atmospheric condition of a specific area, while weather refers to the condition of the atmosphere during a short period of time. So the correct answer and the right answer for this question are C and D. A and B are wrong because the statement doesn't match with what the speaker said. Next, the fourth question. The question is, according to the lecture, what is an example of the effects of climate change? The options are A, polar bears have taken over all the glaciers. B, insects don't know when to pollinate flowers. C, a large amount of flowers are blooming sooner than usual. And D, many animals are searching for new homes. For this question, the answer is C. The answer is C because in that talk, they mentioned that temperature and rainfall play key roles in determining the geographic distribution of plants and animals. They said that, for example, researchers have shown that 385 plant species in England are flowering 5 days sooner than usual. From this question, we can conclude that flowers bloom faster than usual, so the correct answer is C. Option A and B are presented very similar to fake, but are actually misinformation that aim to break our focus. While the answer D is wrong because the statement was not discussed in that talk. And next, the question number 5. The question is, what is the professor implying when she says this? Perfect, Jessica. Maybe I should have you teach the class. And the answer for this question is C. The reason why is because when the professor says, perfect, Jessica, maybe I should have you to teach the class, it refers more to a sentence of praise where the professor is amazed at Jessica's knowledge. So the answer A, B, and D are wrong because the statement is more direct to the negative event, so the meaning of the professor's statement is to revert to the positive way. Therefore, the correct answer is C. The last question for this passage is, what does the professor imply about the role of human activity in climate change? The options are A, humans are definitely largely responsible for climate change. B, we should listen to what the media says about human activity and climate change. C, human activity is possibly part of the problem. And D, the media purposely tries to confuse people about issues. The answer for this question is A. The reason is because in the talk, the professor said that, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that human activity. And this statement leads to the statement that human activity have a major impact on climate change. B is wrong because the statement that contradicts what the professor said. And C actually says a statement that makes it hard for us to choose. But actually this option is presented to deceive us because in this option, the statement is not fully in accordance with what the professor said because the professor said that human activities have a large role in this problem. And D is wrong because basically the media are not trying to confuse us, but they only present the news according to the fact they find. And therefore, we cannot fully trust the media. The next passage that we are going to discuss are passage 3. And of course, the first step that we are going to do is listen to the audio.
Now listen, it's part of a talk in an astronomy class.
Okay, so I'm sure you all know what meteors are, right? Those bright shooting stars in the sky that sometimes pass through the atmosphere and land here on Earth as hot rocks. Well, these alien rocks go on quite a journey to make it here. You see, these meteors start off as comets from other areas in space. The ice in these comets melt when they get close to the sun, which breaks apart and sprays millions of tons of rock and dust into the solar system. As each of the larger dust and rock particles enters the Earth's atmosphere, it creates a brief, fiery trail that is often called a shooting star, but is properly known as a meteor. Since the particles move at speeds of many kilometers per second, friction with the air vaporizes them at an altitude of between 80 and 130 kilometers. The resulting flash of light fade out within a few seconds. To be visible, these shooting stars, or meteors, must be within about 200 kilometers of the observer. On a typical dark and moonless night, you can see up to 6 meteors per hour, maybe more. Now, I don't know about you, but witnessing a shooting star is really a magical feeling. Anyway, the typical meteor is produced by a particle with the mass of less than 1 gram, no larger than a pea. How can we see such a small particle? The light you see comes from the much larger region of heated, glowing gas surrounding this little grain of material. Because of its high speed, the energy in a pea-sized meteor is greater than a bullet being fired by a gun on Earth. But as I'm sure you all know, these shooting stars, these meteors, sometimes land on the ground. Meteorites are pretty much found in 2 ways. First, are meteorite falls. Sometimes bright meteors or fireballs are observed to penetrate the atmosphere and find their way to the Earth's surface. The 2013 Chelyabinsk fireball in Russia produced tens of thousands of small meteorites, many of them easy to find because these dark stones fell on snow. People sometimes discover unusual-looking rocks that turn out to be meteoric. These rocks are termed meteorite finds, the second way meteors are found. Since the 1980s, meteorite finds in the Antarctic have dramatically increased our knowledge of space and its materials. More than 10,000 meteorites have been recovered from the Antarctic as a result of the motion of the ice in some parts of that continent. Meteorites that fall in regions where ice accumulates are buried and then carried slowly to other areas where the ice is gradually worn away. After thousands of years, the rock again finds itself on the surface, along with other meteorites carried to these same locations. The meteorites in our collections have a wide range of compositions and histories, but traditionally they have been placed into 3 broad classes. First are the irons, composed of nearly pure metallic nickel iron. The second are the stones, the term used for any rocky meteorite. The third are the rarer, stony irons, made, as the name implies, of mixtures of stone and metallic iron. Of these three types, the irons and stony irons are the most obviously extraterrestrial because of their metallic content. Pure iron almost never occurs naturally on Earth. Therefore, if you ever come across a chunk of metallic iron, it is sure to be either man-made or a meteorite. The stones are much more common than the irons, but more difficult to recognize. Often, laboratory analysis is required to demonstrate that a particular sample is really of extraterrestrial origin, especially if it has lain on the ground for some time and been subject to weathering. The most scientifically valuable stones are those collected immediately after they fall, or the Antarctic samples preserved in a nearly perfect state by the ice.
Now, answer the questions. 1. What is the purpose of the lecture?
After hearing the audio, we will try to answer and try to find the reason why we choose that option as an answer. And let's take a look to the first question. The first question in passage 3 is, what is the purpose of the lecture? The options are A. To describe the ways in which we find meteorite on Earth. B. To explain how meteorites make it to Earth and their composition. C. To prove that meteorites are extraterrestrial. And D. To illustrate the process of collecting and examining meteorites. The answer for this question is B. The reason is because the main idea in the talk discusses how the meteorite works so that it can reach the Earth and how the content contained in the meteorite makes it works optimally. A is wrong because what is said in point A about where and how meteorites were found is not the main focus of the talk. C is wrong because the statement is not something new and is a common thing that no longer needs to be explained to everyone. Because we all know that meteorites are extraterrestrial beings. And D is wrong because the statement in point D is something that was not discussed too much in the talk. Next, the question is, which type of meteorite are considered the rarest? The options are A. Iron, B. Stones, C. Iron and stony irons, and D. Stony irons. For this question, the answer is D. The reason is that the talk clearly states that there are the rarer stony irons. So we can clearly conclude that stony iron are the rarest meteorites, not the iron or stones mentioned in option A, B, and C. Next, the question number 3, why does the professor discuss meteorites in the Antarctic? The options are A. To prove that meteorite finds are the best way to find meteorite. B. To illustrate the need to look for more meteorite preserved in ice. C. To provide an example of a type of meteorite find. And D. To describe what happens when meteorite land on ice. For this question, the answer is C. The reason is, after listening to the talk, I conclude that the reason why the professor discussed meteorite found in Antarctica was because the professor aimed to show real example of the meteorite discovery. So that's why the answer is C, not A, B, or D.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rahmadaniah Saputra. Today we will take the Toefl test, and today is the listening section. Okay, for the first, we go through the passage 3. Listen the audio first.
Now listen. It's part of a talk in an astronomy class.
Okay, so I'm sure you all know what meteors are, right? Those bright shooting stars in the sky that sometimes pass through the atmosphere and land here on Earth as hot rocks? Well, These alien rocks go on quite a journey to make it here. You see, these meteors start off as comets from other areas in space. The ice in these comets melt when they get close to the sun, which breaks apart and sprays millions of tons of rock and dust into the solar system. As each of the larger dust and rock particles enters the Earth's atmosphere, it creates a brief, fiery trail that is often called a shooting star, but is properly known as a meteor. Since the particles move at speeds of many kilometers per second, friction with the air vaporizes them at an altitude of between 80 and 130 kilometers. The resulting flash of light fade out within a few seconds. To be visible, these shooting stars, or meteors, must be within about 200 kilometers of the observer. On a typical dark and moonless night, you can see up to 6 meteors per hour, maybe more. Now, I don't know about you, but witnessing a shooting star is really a magical feeling. Anyway, the typical meteor is produced by a particle with the mass of less than 1 gram, no larger than a pea. How can we see such a small particle? The light you see comes from the much larger region of heated, glowing gas surrounding this little grain of material. Because of its high speed, the energy in a pea-sized meteor is greater than a bullet being fired by a gun on Earth. But as I'm sure you all know, these shooting stars, these meteors, sometimes land on the ground. Meteorites are pretty much found in 2 ways. First, are meteorite falls. Sometimes bright meteors or fireballs are observed to penetrate the atmosphere and find their way to the Earth's surface. The 2013 Chelyabinsk fireball in Russia produced tens of thousands of small meteorites, many of them easy to find because these dark stones fell on snow. People sometimes discover unusual-looking rocks that turn out to be meteoric. These rocks are termed meteorite finds, the second way meteors are found. Since the 1980s, meteorite finds in the Antarctic have dramatically increased our knowledge of space and its materials. More than 10,000 meteorites have been recovered from the Antarctic as a result of the motion of the ice in some parts of that continent. Meteorites that fall in regions where ice accumulates are buried and then carried slowly to other areas where the ice is gradually worn away. After thousands of years, the rock again finds itself on the surface, along with other meteorites carried to these same locations. The meteorites in our collections have a wide range of compositions and histories, but traditionally they have been placed into 3 broad classes. First are the irons, composed of nearly pure metallic nickel iron. The second are the stones, the term used for any rocky meteorite. The third are the rarer stony irons, made, as the name implies, of mixtures of stone and metallic iron. Of these 3 types, the irons and stony irons are the most obviously extraterrestrial because of their metallic content. Pure iron almost never occurs naturally on Earth. Therefore, if you ever come across a chunk of metallic iron, it is sure to be either man-made or a meteorite. The stones are much more common than the irons, but more difficult to recognize. Often, laboratory analysis is required to demonstrate that a particular sample is really of extraterrestrial origin, especially if it has lain on the ground for some time and been subject to weathering. The most scientifically valuable stones are those collected immediately after they fall, or the Antarctic samples preserved in a nearly perfect state by the ice.
Okay, after we hear the monologue before, and let's start to answer the question for the number 3. Why does the professor discuss meteorite in the Antarctic? For the objective is A, to prove that meteorite finds are the best way to find meteorite. B, to illustrate the need to look for more meteorite preserved in ice. And C, to provide an example of a type of meteorite find, and D. to describe what happened when meteorite land on ice. The best answer for the question number 3 is C. And there are two reasons why the answer is C. The first reason is it is an example of meteorite find, and the second is it introduces the next part of the lecture, where the professor discusses the composition of meteorite. For the next question is number 4. What is the professor implying when he says this? The objective is A. These meteorites are most likely to look like they don't come from Earth. B. These are alien meteorites. The other type of meteorite stone are not extraterrestrial. And D. It's really easy to find this type meteorite on the ground. For the number 4, the answer is A. And the reason why the answer is A is, if you remember that the professor said just before that pure iron is almost rarely ever found on Earth. That might help you answer this question better. The professor uses the word extraterrestrial not to talk about aliens, but to refer to something that doesn't come from Earth. And then we can eliminate B. Then he says these two stones are most obviously extraterrestrial, but that doesn't mean the other type. And then we can eliminate C. Then the professor is also referring to the appearance of stone and not how easy it is to find them on the ground. So we can eliminate D. And the best answer for the question number 4 is A. Next, the question number 5. Next, the question number 5. Based on the information from the listening, indicate which characteristic on the left belong to either stone iron or stony iron. This question is worth 2 points. For the first chart, is easy to spot as meteorites when found on Earth. And this first chart is irons and stony irons. The second is rare of the three, stony iron, and the next is any rocky meteorite, stone, and the last one is composed of metal and stone, is the stony iron. Okay, next question is number 6. The number 6, the question of passage 3 and number 6. Is why can we see a meteor falling in the sky if it's smaller than the size of a pea? The best answer for the number 6 is D. The best answer for the number 6 is D. And the reason is, all of these answers seems possible at first, but you must rely on your memory to accurately answer this question. The professor says The typical meteor is produced by a particle with a mass of less than 1 gram, no larger than a pea. How can we see such a small particle? The light you see comes from the much larger region of heat, glowing gas surrounding this little grain material. Because of its high speed, the energy in a pea-sized meteor is greater than a bullet being fired by a gun on Earth. And this is the reason why the best answer is D. Okay, let's go to the passage 6.
Driving prices down even further. Although some understood the economics of supply and demand, none could control such forces. Eventually, the arrival of a more extensive railroad network aided farmers, mostly by bringing much-needed supplies such as lumber for construction and new farm machinery. In turn, larger commercial farms began to develop. Farmers in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota hired migrant farmers to grow wheat on large-scale farms. These enormous farms were succeeding by the end of the century, but small family farms continued to suffer. Although the land was nearly free, it cost close to $1,000 for the necessary supplies to start up a farm, an impossible sum for most. Many people who were drawn out west for free land ended up as hired workers, working on other farms for a daily wage. The frustration of small farmers grew, ultimately leading to a revolt. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a closer look at.
And if they settle out west, we can also eliminate A because no one was forced to move. People were merely given an incentive. The professors say the American government wanted to get people to start moving out of the East Coast and migrate west to settle this land and create new village, town, and settlements. The Homestead Act of the 19th century gave free land for any brave pioneer who were willing to migrate west and settle in plain lands in modern day. And then the question for the number 3. How does the professor organize the lecturer? And the best answer for the number 3 is A. And the reason why the best answer is A is for a history lecture, this is typical way of organizing the lecture. The professor doesn't spend the lecture providing example of a concept. Rather, he describes a chain of events that resulted after he Homestead Act. And then why the best answer is A. And the next question is number 4. Why does the professor talk about the farmers' homes? And then the best answer for the number 4 is A. And the reason why the best answer is A is the entire lecture discussed the consequence of the Homestead Act, which all happen to be fairly negative. Discussing the housing situation of the farmer is meant to be an example that show the difficulties the farmer face as a result of the Homestead Act. We also learn nothing about what life was like on the East Coast, and we also don't necessarily learn how to farm from the lecture.